welcome to Masters of Divinity. I'm your moderator, JP. Just kind of going through the salsa packets I was handing out to trick-or-treaters last night.
That's what you were doing instead of candy? It was...
No, I wasn't doing it. They don't come out here. It's a little too far out. And I'm here with Father Chuck.
Hey, what's up?
Hey, buddy. We got interesting...
Rocking my beloved new Epcot T-shirt. We haven't really talked about it. I was at Epcot a couple weeks back, and they're in the process of going through the beginnings of their renovation, which I was very nervous about because I love Epcot so much, and I love the aesthetics and the graphic design of it. And I was worried that the update would be really ugly because I've never really forgiven Walt Disney World for what they did to Tomorrowland.
Right.
Because they took this sort of ray gun gothic thing and then they turned it into a really, really ugly kind of 90s industrial looking future thing that I'm not really sure what you call it.
Yeah, I think I've heard of this controversy. A lot of people, a lot of Disney fans online talk about this. There was like a big kind of retrofitting of Tomorrowland that happened around the 90s, and I think part of it was the Alien Encounter ride. There was sort of a storyline in there. They were trying to expand it to the other parts of the park where it was like this sort of homogenous shared universe, if you will, in Tomorrowland with this company called XEO or something like that. I don't know.
Yeah, and it was originally supposed to, because Tomorrowland was, of course, the future. It was about tomorrow. Mm-hmm. And then I guess once they built Future World at Epcot, they realized that it was kind of a redundancy to have Tomorrowland and Future World. Yeah. So because for a while Tomorrowland kind of had a look like early Epcot. Anyway, I was just worried that they were going to do something to Epcot, but I guess they're renovating it at just the right sweet spot where there's a bit of 80s nostalgia still. So like everything they're doing maintains a bit of the old, like it's sort of like a revival of the Epcot aesthetic. So it's not, they're not cool. Changing it. They're just reviving what works.
That's interesting because that's such a thing that people really love about Epcot, and to see Disney actually kind of respond to that feels like that doesn't it feels like they don't normally do stuff like that, like take that into consideration. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
like, I'm kind of wondering who's spearheading that. Is it the guy with the big earring? You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, I know who you're talking about. I can't remember his name, but yeah.
He's like a legend. He's like an Imagineering legend, but he's known for having that giant earring on his ear.
Yeah, maybe it's Kevin Feige.
No, it's not.
They're just letting him do everything.
Yeah.
I mean, we talk about Disney an awful lot on this podcast.
We really do. They're going to think we're like trying to get Disney sponsorship or something, or like.
I really actually wouldn't want that, because then they would. Yeah, but no, but I do think that Disney has hit this interesting place in their life in the past like decade where they actually, for a while they seemed to just sort of like tolerate like the Disney fans, mm-hmm. right? Like they had this idea, this corporate culture of like, this is just what we are, and we're just kind of do what we do because we're Disney, and you'll just accept it because we're Disney.
Yeah, because Michael Eisner was like, that was like this whole thing.
Yeah, and now because they would try to hide, they would try to hide the wires. They would try to, but now like they've realized so many people have caught on to the system and what goes on underneath the park and what goes on behind the scenes, and that people actually kind of admire all of it, like the whole organism and even the mundane parts of it, like the groundskeepers and all of that. That now Disney is not trying to hide that stuff. They're actually kind of embracing it. They're sort of realizing that there are elements of the park that different people are going to want to pay attention to. And so they're finding ways for people to sort of enjoy it in all those different places. And so that's allowed them to kind of, I think, really listen to their fans a little bit more and realize that, if they can do things that make, people happy, they will come and spend a bunch of money at their parks.
Yeah. And, as much as I love Universal, I wish they kind of had their sort of like dedication.
Because everything that made Universal when we were kids is all gone.
It's all gone, and everything is being replaced by screens.
Yep.
And as immersive and as really cool as the Harry Potter stuff is, like the coolest parts about Harry Potter isn't even the rides. It's just like going to the shops and the restaurants and like seeing people dressed up and like just seeing the immersive quality of it.
Which is honestly like Galaxy's Edge.
Oh, really? Oh, that's a
Yeah.
bummer.
I mean, because the Millennium Falcon ride is a screen. You're in front of a screen. It's like a big video
Right.
game.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Standing in line for the Millennium Falcon ride is actually way cooler than the ride itself because
Well,
you're
I
on
heard
the Millennium Falcon.
that ride that's coming out soon sounds really sweet though. Like
Oh yeah, the Rise of the Resistance.
that's definitely gonna have some screens. But also, like, I hear there's like you go into like giant hangars filled with stormtroopers, and like that's what I've heard. Like it's gonna be a
Yeah,
mix of both.
I'm curious about that. I mean, it's funny to me though that here comes Galaxy's Edge. Here comes the opportunity to fly the Millennium Falcon. It was a 40-minute wait. I got to ride that ride twice. I stood in line for 40 minutes twice to ride that
That
ride.
seems like a really short wait for such an anticipated ride at a Disney World.
Pandora has been open almost 3 years,
Yeah.
and Flight of Passage still commands lines of like 200 minutes long.
Wow. Jeez.
It's just kind of amazing to me that an Avatar-themed world
This is doing better than
has,
Star Wars.
yeah,
That's funny.
um,
I wish, and
yeah.
yeah, that's amazing. But just to kind of go back to what I was saying about Universal, they're opening this new park, called Universal's Epic Universe, I think.
Right.
And they haven't really revealed like what it all is going to be there. There's just a title and there's sort of a layout, and it looks cool.
Well,
But
then the Nintendo World is going to be there.
yeah,
Super
I mean,
Nintendo Land.
nothing's been like confirmed or announced on like what's, but
Okay.
that's definitely going to be there because they've been talking about that for years. And there's speculation that there might be a Universal Monster area.
Ooh, nice.
But I wish I wish they would just like surprise all the fans of Universal and have like an entire land dedicated to all the old rides. Like they open up an area and it's just Jaws, Confrontation, Back to the Future, Earthquake.
I'd probably commit some kind of like low level crime just to go on Confrontation again.
I would too, man. I was thinking about that ride this week because I remember this one year I went to Universal Studios, and it was back when they had Universal at they had Halloween Horror Nights at Universal. I guess they do it still now. But they got the brilliant idea to just open up the Confrontation ride, and you could walk through the streets of New York.
Oh,
But yeah, they opened up Confrontation to walk as a walk-through maze that year for Halloween Horror Nights, based on Nightmare Creatures.
that's awesome.
Yeah, it was so cool. God, I love Confrontation.
I will say, and we'll move on after this.
Yeah.
But it's the best queue that I've ever been in.
Yeah, it is. It's scary.
Like
really
it
makes you
actually,
feel-
it has that feeling that you're evacuating from something.
Yeah. And you see into the houses and stuff, or into the apartments next to you and stuff. They're all empty and like.
Like yeah, the TVs are just kind of going and like,
Yeah.
and I love that like in the line, there's like the news broadcast, the emergency news broadcast, and there's like commercials for TV shows and everything. But then there's like it's just that atmosphere that's unparalleled. Like Disney has never done anything to like that level of like
Right.
immersion, anxiety feeling of
It's true.
like, yeah.
Tower of Terror is kind of spooky if you're a kid.
Yeah, I've never been there.
Or the Haunted Mansion, I guess.
I love the Haunted Mansion's my favorite. It's probably my favorite Disney ride.
Yeah.
I love it.
Cool. All right, so we should probably move on after that. I think, Chuck, you and I could start a Disney podcast, and we would always have something to talk about. Like, wait, I don't think we would ever run out of things to say.
Probably like double our listens too.
Probably. Okay, so we're moving on to today's topic, which is interesting. And I'm gonna let Chuck tell you what we're talking about because I think I'm a bit more fascinated with his fascination with this with what we're talking about.
All right, so it's an out of season Music Mayhem episode.
Oh gosh, I hope not because I didn't do any kind of Music Mayhem level of research.
I did.
Okay.
So we are talking about Jesus is King. You have to say it like that 'cause it's all caps.
Oh, okay.
Which is Kanye West's new album, and it is, of course, very popular, and everyone seems to be listening to it. I went to the coffee shop here in Boca Raton the other day, Maine Coffee. Maine Coffee, if you're in Boca, check them out. They don't sponsor the podcast, but you should go. They were playing the album when I walked in, and I there's a line, and I'll get to it in a moment. But there's a line on the second track, "Follow God," or no, sorry, "Follow God," the third track. There's a line in that song that I quoted in my chapel talk on Wednesday, and when I brought up a slide showing the album, the high school kids applauded. And then, I mean, they seemed really excited that I even mentioned it. And then when I quoted the line, I had a whole range of seniors up front yelling, "Preach!"
Oh my gosh.
Just to give you the sense of the cultural moment we're dealing with here with this album. So the background is, so I'm going to say right now, I've the only Kanye West thing I've ever listened to prior to this album was his single "Jesus Walks."
Oh, really?
From the early 2000s, off of his College Dropout, his debut album. Kanye West is a celebrated lyricist. He is considered, he elevated hip hop. A lot of, when you're listening to hip hop these days, a lot of the conventions of hip hop originated with him. The use of auto tune as an instrumentation rather than as a pitch correction is something that he was pioneering in terms of the hip hop realm. Even though Cher was the first one to really use it on Believe, but we won't go there. But yeah, so like I said, and big beats, like big digital beats, and as people say, like chipmunked like soul tracks. So like taking like an old like 70s soul track and then like pitching it out so it sounds like the album of the Chipmunks. Like that's a thing that you hear a lot in hip hop. He pioneered that. He is by and large considered a musical genius. There's a great episode of South Park that makes fun of that. But he is also a controversial figure. He suffers from bipolar disorder, and has gone back and forth on whether or not he feels he should take medication for that. And you can kind of, I guess, see that depending on what album he releases, like what state of mind he's in when he releases it. He is, of course, married to Kim Kardashian, and so they are a very high-profile couple. But Kanye has flirted with religion throughout his career, and apparently over the summer while being treated for his bipolar disorder, started reading the Bible, and he has said that he finally decided to sort of give in to this flirtation with Christianity that he's had throughout his life, and just decided to take the plunge. And so he describes himself now as a born-again Christian. And this album is the outgrowth of that. Interesting about it is that he was in the process of producing another album called Yandi. And he either reworked tracks from that album into this or scrapped things entirely to produce Jesus is King. It was delayed a lot, which I understand if you're a Kanye West fan, is something you're familiar with, is him delaying album releases. And he just sort of unexpectedly dropped it on midnight a couple weeks ago, like last week on Friday midnight or something like that. And it has, of course, been huge. And it is a brisk 27 minutes. It is not long.
Yeah, I was really surprised at how fast I got through the album.
Yeah.
And apparently this is a new trend for him. That 2018 is sort of punctuated by like a bunch of records that he helped produce that are about 20 minutes long each. And apparently they're all brilliant.
Yeah, I mean, I've listened to punk records that are longer than this thing.
Yeah, I know. It's like a Ramones album, right? Like,
yeah.
Oh, maybe not that short. I think a Ramones album is like 15 minutes.
Yeah. But it's also been kind of a fascinating thing to follow. And I downloaded it mostly because I felt like, oh, here's this huge artist releasing an album titled Jesus is King, and being someone who worked with teenagers, I just sort of knew that this was going to be major. And I really would sort of wanted to be aware of what's being said, because, you know, what Kanye is saying, because inevitably someone's going to hear that. And there are a lot of people that this is going to be their introduction to Christianity, or this is going to be, you know, what puts ideas. And so, like, if I'm teaching a Bible class or something, like, I could hear things, you know, I can anticipate things from this coming up. What is, so we'll get into it a little bit more in depth. But what's been interesting is just the wider popular conversation that's come with the release of it, of, you know, on one hand, people saying, is he really a Christian, or is he just doing this in order to make money? Is this a fad? Is this, you know, there's a lot of criticism about it, saying he's not a good person, and so, like, they don't trust his Christianity. Then there's others who are just saying that he might really be a Christian, that's fine, but the album's not that good. And I think I fit with that larger music critic consensus that it has its moments of brilliance, and there are a couple of tracks that are really, really good, but the sum is not greater than its parts, and that when taken all together, it feels largely unfinished and somewhat rushed.
Yes.
But that being said, I also think that's kind of the point. Because I think I've mentioned to you and Matt in our conversations about this earlier in the week that I feel almost like it's almost like glossolalia. It feels like it was something that he felt that he had to put something out now that he's got this newfound faith. Like, he had to do something. He had to make, put a recording out.
What's glossolalia, by the way? I don't know what that means.
Speaking in tongues.
Oh, okay. All right.
What kind of Pentecostal word do you make?
Not a very good one, apparently.
But that spontaneous kind of utterance, and so, you know, which is really more rooted in the emotions rather than any form of the intellect, and that's definitely what this feels like. And, you know, and I've joked with you, and I'll say it now, that it definitely feels like a Christian album because it's just a bunch of Bible verses and platitudes.
Yeah, well, and you know, that's sort of something I'm interested in sort of exploring about this album. I have to admit, you know, I listened to the album. I didn't do a huge deep dive, but I listened as closely as I could. And I will say, you know, these sort of accusations that it's just a fad, that he's just doing it for money. I think if you actually listen to the album, that's not necessarily true, because to me, while listening to this album, I didn't hear someone like, this is it, this is the new Sheen, this is the new costume, this is the new outfit, this is the new Kanye. It was more like, hey, I found this thing and I'm just kind of exploring it. Like, these are my thoughts about it. Like, it's not, I don't think, it doesn't sound like any Christian album I've ever heard of, which is like, you know, the South Park joke. It's like you just take relationship songs and replace the girl's name with Jesus, right?
Right.
So it's not like that, like a praise album. It's not like a, you know, Jesus is great, Jesus is my friend album. It's a, you know, I'm exploring this, and this is how I feel about it.
Yeah, I mean, it would be nice if it would be a little bit more in depth in terms of its lyricism. I mean, I've listened to the album all the way through probably about 12 times now, and and like the more I listen to it, the more I like it.
Which is the song that says, "I thought Job was a job" or something like.
Oh gosh, yeah. I will say
that kind of sums up what I'm trying to say. Is what I think the album is like. You know, like.
Yeah, I'm telling the devil that I'm going on strike, which is an interesting question or an interesting statement, because striking means that, like, you could go back because you're not quitting.
Right. Yeah.
You're striking. It's very interesting. But yeah, and that's the thing is, like, it sounds, I told you early on that it feels a little bit like
it's more
the
like
musical equivalent of that.
Examination.
Maybe. I also think it has a bit of, it's a little over exuberant in the sense of, like, and like I said, it's like that meme of, like, listens once or tries once. Oh, yeah. You know, that, you know, you listen to this thing one time and suddenly, like, it becomes your identity, right?
Yeah.
Like, it feels almost like Kanye went to church once and now suddenly it's like, oh, here I am, you know? And, like, that's great, right? That's like the kind of spontaneous conversion experiences that a lot of us Christians, like, hope for people. But I kind of listening to a lot of the record, I'm like, I kind of wish he would let it stew a little bit more before he started writing an album about it, because not that there's any damage or anything being done. It just sounds like a lot of it is half baked, and that if he had just given it some more time and really sat with it a little bit longer, I think the statement could have been so much stronger of what he's trying to do with it. And like the songs Hands On and Use This Gospel are without a doubt the strongest tracks on the album. Mm-hmm. And if more of the album sounded like that, then I think that that there would be more.
Which track?
Hands On and Use This Gospel.
Okay. Yeah.
They're like the two of the last three tracks. Because the final track is Jesus is Lord, right? That's what it's called, and it's just like very simple short thing. It's like a coda.
Like a punctuation, like an exclamation.
Yeah. But like, yeah, but I agree with you, JP, that it has that feeling of exploration. Like he's very new at it. Mm-hmm. And he's really excited about it, and he wants other people to be excited about it. But it's almost like he can't convey fully what it is that he's excited about, which gives it a bit of a connection with that sort of, again, sort of charismatic gospel music kind of approach, to where, you know, there's definitely a bit more of an emotion to it than rationality.
Yeah.
And there's nothing wrong with that. It'll just be interesting to see where he goes with his career after this, because I would think, you know, me interjecting on it, that, you know, I would think that in like 5-6 years, if he stays on this religious track and matures in his faith, he's going to look back at this and be like, ooh, like.
Yeah, that's a question I actually kind of want to ask you a little bit later, about sort of the future of Kanye West after this album.
Yeah.
But I do kind of want to talk a little bit more about sort of the quality of the album, because, you know, I'm not like a huge Kanye fan. I've listened to a good number of his songs, and I like them. I really love Power. Whenever I hear Kanye West, like the song Power just always just injects itself into my brain, and I can't get it out for days. I think he's good. I that's JP's opinion of Kanye West. I think he's good. So I'm not like an expert is the thing, and I don't want to like approach this from like a place of ignorance or anything, but like, I don't know, compared to what I've heard, this feels very average. You know, as an album, as far as the sounds go, and I think a lot of it has to do with what you were saying, that sort of rush quality. It feels like it feels like an album that's made up mostly of songs of like he's trying to see what sticks.
Yeah,
you know, almost like, it might sound kind of paranoid, but it's almost like he's trying to see what he can carve out of an audience, you know? Trying to see like what works with like for other people. Like are they gonna latch on to the Chick-fil-A song, or are they gonna latch on to Selah? I don't know. There's a conceptual element to it that I'm seeing, where it's like you can kind of see, like we were talking about Disney, you can kind of see the wires, you know, you can kind of see the seams a little bit. But I think overall, just from my own personal taste, I just kind of found it to be pretty average.
Yeah, like I said, I don't have much to compare it to. I mean, I'm sort of arriving at listening to hip hop really seriously kind of late in the game, because it wasn't a musical genre I was really all that into growing up, right? I mean, like the most rap I listened to, you know, as a teenager was like DC Talk.
Who, and like, tragically, that tragic news this week. Toby Mac's son passed away.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, they haven't released cause of death yet, but I think it was just like a few days ago. This is older. This is his older son, like in his 20s, I think. He was had his own rap career.
Wow, but yeah, that's sad. Yeah. But like I listen to them, like Beastie Boys, of course, you know, and then of course, you know, rap elements that are in things like Rage Against the Machine, POD, stuff like, and 311, stuff like that. But
real rap, real rap, yeah.
Real rap, yeah.
Papa Roach, totally, yeah. That's...
Oh gosh. But no, then I've since decided in the past, like about the past decade, I've really tried to explore, you know, expand my musical horizons, and so I've been listening to like Tribe Called Quest, Jay-Z, and now this, you know, and a couple other things, but also, you know, of course, this Kanye album. And so like I said, I don't have a whole lot to compare it to, and I'm reading reviews and thoughts on it, and people are saying how this track sounds like it belonged on this album or whatever. And so like, and of course these are people who are also following everything he says in his interviews, and they're sort of, kind of getting into that death of the author conversation. They're allowing all of that stuff to kind of feed into the record itself rather than letting it stand on its own. And so I'm kind of grateful for the fact that I've been listening to it without all of that baggage, because, I'm just kind of coming at it as its own product. Mm-hmm. And I still feel like a lot of it's incomplete. I feel like both Follow God, which is a song I also like off the album, but I feel like Follow God and Close on Sunday, also known as the Chick-fil-A song, that both of those tracks, they're back to back, and they both end with him yelling at the end just to stop the song, and it feels like you couldn't come up with an ending.
Probably.
And so, like, Follow God kind of makes sense because it's conveying his frustration, because he's repeating himself over and over, and it just ends on a note of frustration, and I get that. But Close on Sunday, with him just yelling Chick-fil-A at the end, was like clearly like he ran out of things to say. And can we just say that is?
Do we want to talk about the Chick-fil-A song?
It is both it is easily the most memorable song on the album.
Yeah.
And the worst.
Yeah, it's silly. Like it feels purposely silly. But at the same time, like I was saying, I feel like it's him just trying to see who's going to stick to this song, and is this going to be my career? Like singing about Chick-fil-A and like going to Holy Land Experience. Is that going to be what Christianity is going to be for me?
Which there's an interesting bit right throughout the album. And other people have pointed this out, is that there is a capitalistic element throughout throughout a lot of the record, and this very sort of capitalistic, sort of big box megachurch Christianity, prosperity gospel kind of stuff has woven itself into it a bit. And, Chick-fil-A is a perfect encapsulation of, the sort of Christian bubble subculture that you and I grew up with.
Yeah.
You could go to your Christian bookstore to buy all your stuff, and you can go eat lunch at your Christian fast food restaurant and go get coffee at your Christian coffee houses.
The alternative evangelical lifestyle.
Right. You go to your Christian arts and crafts store to decorate your house.
You watch your Christian movies, and you listen to your Christian songs, and you wear your Christian clothes on your Christian skateboard.
Yeah. So Chick-fil-A is sort of really kind of the last holdout of that, because like all the other stuff is going away. Yeah. And I've noticed on like Instagram a lot of memes about Chick-fil-A in the Christian world. And so it almost makes me wonder, did Kanye, is this a perfect example of somebody of the social media age that, like, in trying to understand what it means to be Christian, he turned to Instagram and saw all these memes about Chick-fil-A, and so like that's become part of the language of the, like, there's because there's almost like a pandering element to that, like using Chick-fil-A in a rap song that's ostensibly about his wife. Which adds an interesting, because I get the sense that, Kim is not on the same trajectory as him.
Probably not.
And so the idea of, is he saying that, like, closed on Sunday, you're my Chick-fil-A, like you're closed off to like Sunday, to like the church thing?
Yeah, because I mean, it's the whole saying about Chick-fil-A. It's closed on the one day you want it the most, which is on Sunday. Right. And she's saying you're my number one with lemonade.
Yeah, which I can't help but hear a Beyonce reference in that.
That's true too.
Because Kanye sees himself. He sort of chased Jay-Z a little bit, right? He wants the status that Jay-Z has.
I mean, what is he known? What is Kanye West mostly known for? Beyonce had the greatest album of all time.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And so, that song. There's elements of it that are very interesting when you listen, but it's so corny.
I know. Yeah, it's just silly. Like, and it's like, it kind of feels like maybe he thinks he's being sort of punk rock. It kind of reminds me of punk, where it's like they sung about like drinking Sunkiss and going to Taco Bell or whatever. You know what I mean?
Right.
But it doesn't mesh with the rest of the concept of the album. Like.
If the Christian rap group LA Symphony, if they did a song about Chick-fil-A, or like Lecrae, who's like a famous Christian rapper, if he were to do a song about Chick-fil-A, or even Chance the Rapper, who sometimes he keeps his foot kind of in the Christian world. If he did a song about Chick-fil-A, like we would all be like, okay, like that fits, that makes sense, right? Like that's part of, there's a witticism and a bit of humor to some of these
I think
folks.
even Childish Gambino, like if he would probably, his
Yeah,
lyrics are very pop culture-y and
yeah.
yeah,
But to have Kanye West, who's not, I just don't think he's known. Like Kanye kind of famously is sort of been criticized for not being self-aware
yeah,
and having like a sense of humor about himself, that he takes everything he does very seriously.
right.
And so it does have like a weird, seems out of character and just kind of try hard.
Mm-hmm. Right.
But like I said, it's easily the most memorable track from the album.
Which is, I don't know, that could be like such a, I don't know, I can't gauge music audiences because I'm so not on the up and up at all. And it's like part of me says like, dude, that's gonna so alienate your audience, but probably not. That might make it more popular.
Well, and like there's so many evangelicals right now are just so excited about this record. Mm-hmm. Because there's this weird thing within evangelical Christianity, right, where there's this chasing of the pop culture acceptance, mm-hmm. while also like if you're a Christian band and you get pop culture acceptance, there's this attitude that like you sold out.
Right.
Unless you're Switchfoot. For some reason, Switchfoot got a pass. But there's this whole desire, though, of like, on one hand, you want somebody in the mainstream culture to have this big conversion experience because that somehow legitimates your faith, right? The same way that like comic book fans want their comics on the big screen, somehow legitimates what they're doing, the thing they're into. Mm-hmm. But then there's this weird bit where like the evangelical Christians also kind of distrust that conversion experience.
Yeah.
And that's another piece of what's going on with this, and that's really the thing that I'm kind of also like the more interested in is like Kanye's Christianity.
Exactly. Yeah. It's the whole thing. Like that's something that I always kind of criticize is they are evangelicals sort of repelled by Hollywood, and yet they want to be Hollywood.
Right. It's so much like
they want Hollywood power and influence.
Yeah, it's like that. It's like being in high school and having. You have like this intense crush on a girl doesn't reciprocate, and so like you kind of hate them, but you want them to love you.
I guess so, yeah.
Like really insecure nerdy guys know that experience. Yeah. Not that we were ever those kinds of guys. We were.
It was a breeze. Women flocked to me. I had to tell them like, look, I got to study. I'm trying to get into Palm Beach Atlantic University.
Listen, guys, I'm trying to maintain that GPA. I can't be.
And also, by the way, 6 inches, please.
Yes, keep 6 inches space. That's right. Respect my boundaries. Enough room. Leave room for the Holy Spirit.
Exactly.
But yeah, and then of course, right? There's this whole other, and the part that frustrates me and it makes me sad for Kanye, is all of the opportunists who are seizing on this moment.
Yeah.
Like let's assume, all right. Let's make an assumption that I think is a correct assumption. He had a dramatic conversion experience, right?
Okay.
This, of course, has coincided with some of his weird thoughts on politics and other things that we don't necessarily need to get into.
Hey, quick question, real quick, before you get into it.
Yeah.
Unless you're going to talk about it, who did the conversion? Do we know? Like. What church did he go to? Which pastor? The story that he's told is that he while he was in the hospital being treated for something with his bipolar disorder, I think that's what it was. He was in some kind of treatment facility. While there, there was like Gideon Bible or whatever, and he read it. And as he was reading through it. He was like writing verses, trying to like writing them down to keep them in like just to keep them like for use in like future songs. And like creating rhymes and stuff based off of Bible verses. And through the process of doing that, he said it just kind of clicked with him. And he decided to turn his life over to the Lord. And then he got in touch with this pastor named Adam. I can't remember. And I can't remember the name of his church either. I didn't do the research. But it's a kind of. Is it a evangelical kind of church? It's a kind of evangelical church, yeah. But not really. It's not, actually, I take it back. No, it's not. It's an evangelical church, but it's
it's more of a Pentecostal type church. It's not one of these like Brooklyn.
It's not like a high priest, Justin
No,
Bieber.
no, it's not one of those, which surprised me. I would have fully expected that to be the case, but no, it's fairly conventional kind of church. But I think the pastor, I have to look up his name, but the pastor is kind of a bit of a health and wealth type dude.
Okay.
And he sort of shepherded him through the process. Also, apparently also contributed some lyrics to the album.
Oh, of course.
To help Kanye, be a little more accurate in his theology or whatever.
Interesting.
But there's also been stories that Joel Osteen has been circling Kanye.
Yeah, I've heard of that.
Since the conversion. And of course, we've seen the Trump family because Kanye has kind of famously worn a MAGA hat and supported Trump, which has been very confusing for a lot of people. So you see all these opportunists, the people who clearly don't get what's going on with him, but they want to suddenly, be associated with it because it'll help their bottom line and what they think it will. And that's the thing like that kind of just like what makes me concerned about Kanye is I hope that, Jesus tells a story about the parable of the sower, right? Sows his seed and it falls in different places. Sometimes it falls on the roadside, sometimes it falls on the stony ground, right? And the stony ground is the one where, is the person who receives the word, but receives it with such enthusiasm. But then suddenly when things kind of go south, they abandon it. And I worry that like that we could see that with him, that like he's got this great zeal and this legitimate, amazing thing has happened. But then the worst elements of the church have seized upon him. Mm-hmm. And that the better parts of the church, like the church that could really be in a position to help encourage him and shepherd him properly through the early stages of his faith, they're the ones that are like criticizing him and like not sure of it, right? Like I think of like the Apostle Paul. When Saul of Tarsus had his conversion experience, he had it sort of on his own, and he had Ananias come and kind of walk him through what needed to happen. And then you read in the book of Acts that the church didn't trust him, and they didn't trust his conversion experience because he had been a persecutor of the church, and so they didn't trust him. And when he would try to show up at churches, they would like run from him or reject him because they were, they still didn't trust that this was going to happen, or that this was legitimate. They thought maybe it was another thing that he was doing to try to root out the Christians. Right. And it took someone like Barnabas, whose name means son of encouragement, to step up and to really just like vouch for him and kind of encourage him and maintain, his course. And Paul himself later says that he spent 3 years kind of in the wilderness figuring this stuff out before he made another reemergence because the church had rejected him so strongly. And then it wasn't until Barnabas and James and others vouched for him, 3 or 4 years later, that he became who he became. Mm-hmm. And so like it could be cool to see a similar thing happening with Kanye, but I just and I hope for that. I think, in the song, I think in Hands On, he asked to be prayed for. And I think it's important to pray for him, but also to pray that like these really awful opportunistic elements within the Christian world don't really latch into him too much, that he's sort of protected from that, because I can't imagine anything worse to a new Christian with a bunch of money and a bunch of fame to then like have Joel Osteen grab a hold of you.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, if you want to kill any legitimacy you have.
Yeah. And, it's kind of funny. You said you're kind of feel sorry for him because of what might be happening. You want to know who I feel sorry for right now, Chuck? Justin Bieber.
Oh, right. Because
this kind of puts him on the chopping block, right? Like,
because he was supposed to be the high profile evangelical.
Yeah. Now it's Kanye. Oh, you can't compete with that.
And I mean, hearing these names, I just couldn't help but, acknowledge, that there's an interesting, on one hand, I want to say, like, it's kind of how interesting is it that, like, a white pretty boy becomes a Christian, or really embraces his Christianity, and we're just sort of like, okay. Yeah. But a black man does, and now it's like, what? What an interesting reversal of the past. But right. That also got me thinking about the response that we're getting from some quarters of the Christian world that seem pretty consistent with some of the race issues that happen within elements of Christianity, particularly the evangelical Christian world, where there's this attitude of like black Christianity is not legitimate Christianity.
Right.
Like black evangelicalism is sort of its own thing, and it's it kind of, it's less civilized. There's still like that element of like, those people and their worship and what they do over there. And,
Yeah, just
and
all
we don't
the
take it
arguments about Martin Luther King and stuff,
Yeah, and they just don't take it seriously, right? Like you just don't take Black Christianity as seriously in the white evangelical world, which is something that they have to come to terms with in the white evangelical world, and just seem to be completely ignorant of. But because I think that the people who are criticizing Kanye's conversion are some of the same people who would hold those attitudes of like the black church is the black church. It's
right.
It's sort of until they kind of come into our world. They're not it's the thing I've talked about Relevant Magazine over the years. The biggest concern, and one of the reasons why I stopped reading Relevant Magazine, is that as I flip through issues of Relevant Magazine, the only black faces that you see in that magazine are poor children in Africa, or white girls on a mission trip next to them.
Yeah, they got some hot water over that recently, didn't they?
Did they? I didn't know. I haven't been following. Oh, finally!
I think some people on their staff are like, "Yeah, this is like a very, very white magazine," and they got into a lot of trouble over it. I had to do some more research on it.
And that, they got me thinking of there's another. It'll come to me later. Oh yeah, about the Babylon Bee. We should do an episode on the Babylon Bee.
Oh man,
what a misogynistic, transphobic, homophobic publication. If you are a Christian and you are listening to this podcast, please stop reading the Babylon Bee. Please do not let them have a platform. I am not a fan of cancel culture. Cancel the Babylon Bee.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. They are there's just some willful ignorance. I did a little kind of researching into their whole culture and who runs the sites and stuff, and I want to say surprised, but I was not surprised with what I found in terms of a lot of phobias.
Yes.
On social media. Yeah.
And they're now apparently claiming that Snopes is trying to deplatform them.
Yeah, there's like this weird war between them and Snopes, right?
Well, yeah, which I don't. That makes no sense at all, right? Like, one is like poor man's Onion. The other is like a fact checking.
Yeah.
Website. I don't.
We used to use that to debunk our grandparents' forwards.
Right, but apparently they have a liberal bias, JP. You can't trust them anymore.
Of course, right? Yeah.
Exactly. Because you paint the bullseye around the target now, and then when somebody points that out, like, oh no, you're willfully ignorant. But anyway, yeah, no. So so this is this whole thing is just a fascinating conversation, and I'm so frustrated with the haters about Kanye's album because I feel almost like this album.
When you say haters.
Yeah.
You mean just people who are just like overly critical of it, or do you think people have like sort of bad faith about his Christianity? What do you mean by haters?
Yes.
Okay.
That's what I mean.
Right.
People have bad faith about his Christianity, people who are overly critical of the album because they're like it's not it's either not religious enough or it's not the right kind of religious. I feel a little bit like when the Ghostbusters reboot came out, right?
Oh boy, here we go.
There were so many people who hated that movie because of I think the Ghostbusters reboot is a bad movie, but not for the same reason that most people on the internet who look like me and look like you think that movie's a bad movie. I think it's a poorly made movie. Mm-hmm. It's just it is not a good movie. It has nothing to do with the gender of the cast or any other political, social, anything. Just in the technical aspect of the movie, it's not good, in my opinion. Kanye West's Jesus is King, as a complete record, not that. I mean, I'm not going to say it's bad. I don't think it's bad.
Yeah.
But I don't think that it's like transcendent and like the greatest thing that's ever been produced in terms of music. It's interesting, and there are some really profound moments in the album. I mean, like I could talk on and on about the two songs "Hands On" and "Use This Gospel." Particularly, I mean, for no other reason than "Use This Gospel" features Kenny G.
Oh yeah, that's actually a really good song, and it's cool. It's such a weird choice, but It's actually really good.
Yeah, and it has the reunion of the Clips rap duo, which is
Right.
apparently a big deal.
They're are they a Christian hip hop?
They weren't, but now they are.
Okay. Yeah.
They also had a conversion experience. It's kind of interesting. The best songs on the album are the ones that don't feature Kanye as prominently, like
Yeah.
more when he's in producer role rather than musician role. But I think like there are some really great moments on the record. Like I said, I wish that it had a little more time to gestate creatively. And I think it would have been much stronger. It feels, I think I told you, it feels earlier. It feels a little bit like I'm watching like the working cut, or I'm listening to to a working cut of an album, not an actually complete album. And hey, that's if you're gonna, I mean, if like Kanye is gonna make something, and even his mediocre or average type stuff is better than almost anything that I would produce or anyone else would produce on their best day. So like if this amounts to sort of average for Kanye, like that's still a testament to his talent. Like it's a very interesting piece of music that I think I think people should listen to. Like it's just because of what all is entailed inside of it in terms of our culture, and especially as Christians is our culture. But in terms of a technical album, I don't know that I think it's all that done.
Well, what is your favorite track on the album?
It's a toss up for me between Hands On and Use This Gospel.
Yeah.
And I could go through, and there are a lot that I like, and like I said, even with Close on Sunday, I'm finding elements in it that the more I listen to it, that I like it more.
Are you sure it's not just that's not just you're not just being held hostage? This is not Stockholm syndrome.
I don't think it's Stockholm syndrome. But I think because like Hands On, I mean, just some of I was just listening to that before we started recording. There's some raw honesty in that song. That's the one where he says that like the Christians will be the first to judge him.
Yeah, and that's what it's kind of been going through my head as we were talking about his critics and stuff. I'm like, he kind of knows what he's sort of going to be facing, is that people are his biggest critics are probably going to be Christians.
Yeah,
and that he's kind of preparing himself for it. It's kind of interesting that it's in the album. So it's like it's also kind of a sort of a way like, well, if I do it first, they probably won't do it. Like
right.
Or if I do it first, it won't affect me when they eventually do it.
Yeah. And then I what I love about Use This Gospel is, of course, like the Kenny G part, both of the, what is it? Pusha and No Malice, the two, Clips artists, like their verses are really good. And just, I think that one's the strongest in terms of its sound. Just a simple piano and then the auto-tuned,
right.
I'm trying to figure out if that's Kenny G's saxophone auto-tuned playing throughout the background, or if it's someone's voice.
I don't know.
But that's good. And then what's the one? I'm trying to remember, there's one where Kanye himself actually sings, and he like shreds his voice to sing this track, and it actually is kind of strong. I'm gonna pull it up. Let's see. I'm looking at my desktop over here where I have it. I think it's Everything We Need is the one where he just like he himself actually sings, and because like he doesn't have the strongest voice, like he's singing something that doesn't really work with his range, but that actually makes it really like emotionally raw.
Mm-hmm.
And again, like I think the other thing too is if you approach this record more from the emotion he's trying to convey rather than the content, like any kind of statements that you're looking for, it's stronger when you realize that this is more like a Pentecostal like outburst rather than like a measured kind of like traditional understanding of a piece of art. It's
Have you watched
more spontaneous than that.
Have you watched any of his Sunday service performances?
No, I haven't.
The choir he uses is like really good, especially on this album.
Yeah,
I think some of the best parts of this album is a lot of the use of the choir.
Yeah, and that's another thing I'm a little concerned about. I'm a little concerned about him having a church service.
Yeah.
Like, dude, you're too new to this to be having a church service.
It feels like, I think it's just like a concert that's dressed up as a church service, which is, I mean, I guess that's most. I don't know if I'm not going to say no.
I mean, I'm a very traditionalist guy, and
I don't want to make enemies with other denominations that we're kind of already sort of critical of on this podcast. Is all I'm saying.
Hey, look, man, you can say it, right? Like Jesus told us to gather together, and the church for 2,000 years has gathered together to share a common meal, right? That's, even Paul says, when you gather together, this is what you do. And, we weren't really told to get together and have a rock concert with a fog machine with like Bible study attached to the end of it.
Yeah.
But
see, Chuck understands. I understand. I trust that you all understand as well.
But so what are your, I mean, I've done a lot of talking, JP. What are your, how many times have you listened to it?
I listened to it once.
Oh.
But I listened to a couple songs repeat just to kind of hear the lyrics.
Okay.
But I just, like I said, I just found it to be average, and I guess I don't have too much to say about it because I just not like a big Kanye fan. The music didn't really affect me that much. I thought I saw some flourishes of what was sort of well done. Like I said, the choir use in some of the songs are really, really great. Close on Sunday is a silly song. I find it to be a little embarrassing, frankly. But who knows? That might become like a cult classic,
I totally could see it. I totally could see it becoming a cult classic.
Yeah, I could just see like youth groups going to karaoke and singing that. You know what I mean? Like, it's the Gen Z's new dabbing. Like. But I just think overall, not really necessarily for me. I think it's interesting that it is sort of approached as more of an examination of what he's experiencing through Christianity. What was a song where he talks about like yelling at his chauffeur, yelling at his dad?
That's Selah.
Selah, yeah, I like Selah. That one kind of stuck with me. That felt a bit more traditional in terms of Kanye, right? Like,
yeah. What is that? Where he says, "I'm not mean, I'm persistent." Is that what he says?
I think so.
Something like that. But yeah, no, that's.
Yeah. So I think it's so like I was kind of I was going into it sort of thinking, okay, this is going to be we talk about this all the time. We even sort of joked about it earlier. Christian music being sort of an alternative to what the secular things you're already into. When you become a Christian, you get rid of the secular things and you buy the evangelical alternatives. And I was afraid that was what this album was going to be, but I was really surprised. No, this is someone just sort of genuinely reflecting on what he's experiencing and what he's learning. And I think a lot of sort of the half-bakedness is probably from the fact that he's so new to it.
Yeah. And it also mentioned a lot of reviewers have compared it to Bob Dylan's "Slow Train Comin'," which was the record that Bob Dylan released after he became a born again Christian in the 70s.
Ah, okay, I haven't heard that.
And kind of interesting that in this is something worth probably discussing at some point, is that when mainstream artists become Christians, their album sales plummet.
Oh, really?
Which reinforces this idea that we're a persecuted faith,
of course.
But in the States, and I mean it is interesting too that so we got Kanye becoming a Christian, but like Derek Webb, who did a little bit talking about his record, Derek Webb, who was with Caedmon's Call and has had a pretty legitimate solo career in his own, recently came out and said he no longer calls himself a Christian. Christian punk band MXPX has since said they've left the faith. So many of these Christians that have gained some kind of mainstream embrace have, abandoned their Christianity, and one could argue that they've done so in order to increase album sales. But here we have one of the biggest artists in the world now claiming to be a Christian.
Yeah,
it's interesting that this is happening. And of course, all the artists that I just mentioned are white.
Right.
And so that's another piece that's kind of worth considering is, this is all happening when the Pew Research, report comes out about church attendance and religious affiliation among millennials and Gen Z, and how, the numbers are down. Something like 44% of millennials don't identify with any kind of religious tradition.
Right.
And so, there's so many churches are kind of, they're kind of shaking in their boots. But there was an article in the Living Church, as an Episcopal Anglican publication just this past week, that pointed out that overall, like within the Episcopal Church, for instance, those numbers are down. It's probably true for all Christian denominations. It is, but they pointed out that they're not, like, when you look at the numbers in the South, Arkansas, Georgia, they're actually either like stagnating, some possibly going up, but their diminishment is less than you see in the Northeast and other parts of, or the Northwest. And so those numbers are really like dropping. They're the ones that influence the statistics. But when we're looking at the American culture, is this question of where things are shifting, because it was a decade or more ago, like in the Northeast, like the numbers were different. And so, the influence of a lot of these churches is actually moving south. And, so it's kind of interesting to think, where else is this happening, right? Like white evangelicals within the evangelical subculture bubble that we grew up with are sort of leaving the faith. But now, here's one of the largest artists in the world, who is a black man, and he's embracing the faith. And it just makes me wonder, like, where is this indicative of other shifts that we're seeing happening? Right. Because again, when we talk about evangelicals and we talk about all that, we tend to talk about white people. And I just think I just can't help but see all this stuff, kind of, interrelated and happening at this in this sort of confluence of events is kind of interesting to me.
Yeah.
And that's really kind of why I wanted to talk about this. Is probably more than the music piece, is also the wider cultural piece. So, like, what do you think, JP, about like Kanye's faith? I mean, knowing you obviously, as you've mentioned, you don't know much about Kanye personally coming into it, but like as like a statement of faith, like what are your thoughts on Jesus is King?
It just reminds me so much of. It kind of reminds me of when I was 12 years old, and I went to the Acquire the Fire concert in Colorado.
Acquire the Fire,
and
it's been like branded a cult, by the way.
No, really?
Yeah.
Great, of course. Just my luck.
Sorry.
And it's sort of where I became a Christian. That's where I was saved. That's where my testimony begins, you guys.
Sorry to interrupt. I just realized we've never done that on this show.
Oh, really?
We've never shared our testimonies. Actually, I've known you for almost 20 years, and I this is the first time actually hearing this story.
Really? I never told you I went to Acquire the Fire when I was 12, and that's how I became a Christian.
No.
Well, it was just it was, I was 12 years old, very impressionable. Did the whole thing where they did it was my first altar call. And the effect it had on me, it wasn't so much organic as it was performative, where it's like I had to act a certain way, I had to say certain things, I had to be, I was sort of I was paying closer attention to how Christians around me were talking and describing things, and sort of emulating that, not necessarily arriving to it from my own experience. And it's sort of a overzealousness, I could say, because you're really excited about this new way of thinking. And I think that I feel like that's sort of what he's experiencing, and I think that this album is sort of a reflection of that sort of that sort of excitement, that high, where like you feel like your life is completely changed, and he's sort of examining how it's making him feel and what he's going through while that happens. Do I think it's genuine? I think I mean, who am I to say? I
right.
can't say whether or not it is. I can't
Right.
I can't say it about
knows,
Kanye.
right?
I can't say it about Kanye. I can't say that about my neighbor. I can't say it about the people who go to church, right? So I don't know. But how do I feel about it overall? I mean, that's how I feel as it relates to the album. I guess I don't know. Just it could happen to anybody. Yeah, it's our culture. It's American culture. You know, Western
Yeah.
society and Christianity. Christianity dominates Western society. As much as Fox News doesn't want you to believe that, they think the Muslims are taking over. They're not. The Christians won. It's kind of inevitable, I guess. I'm actually kind of surprised that, like I said, I don't know Kanye. I'm actually kind of surprised that this isn't like already happened with him. You know what I mean? That he's not already sort of proclaimed as being sort of a Christian before in the past and stuff. I guess.
Which will,
Yeah.
I was say, which I mean, you brought up that, and I remember in the early 2000s when College Dropout came out and Jesus Walks was all over the radio. Relevant was
Jesus
like,
Walks, which
yeah, Relevant magazine was doing this whole thing about Kanye as a Christian rapper.
yeah.
Anyway, sorry, go ahead.
But I think it's also sort of the timing of sort of this. It's not so much him becoming a Christian, and it's also like the timing of it happening a year after like he wore the MAGA hat. You know, he met Donald Trump, and so like it's at that point you're creating a narrative,
Right.
you know. Is he going to the other side? Is that I think that's sort of the sensationalism surrounding it, you know.
Right. Is it one of these things where the faith kind of came as a result of him going that direction because
Exactly.
that's just sort of part of all the things you have to do in order to.
Precisely.
Yeah, which would be fascinating to find out if like the Lord uses that as like a subversion technique, right? Like, all right, so there he is. He's hanging out wearing the MAGA hat, and he's hanging out with Trump, and this gets him introduced to Christianity. And then he reads like Matthew 25, where it talks about like, unless you give to, like how you treat others is how you treat me. And suddenly Kanye then like has this huge 180, becomes like this like incredible, this incredible like prophet. Changes the course of the culture, gets Christians to, stop being, like it would be pretty amazing actually.
And people were saying that when he wore the MAGA hat that he was going to do that, something similar, that it was just like a setup where it's like he's going to get in with the Trump supporters, right, with the Trump clan, and then he's going to have a big concert where he's going to be like just flip them all off like while their guards are down, But I'm actually kind of more interested in the future, because this feels more like a fork in the road to me. Like you could either, like this could either just be what we see in this album is the new Kanye West, Christian focused albums and music. Or it could be like the end,
Right.
because he has such a successful year in 2018 producing.
Right.
I mean, I think it was like the Kid Cudi album that apparently everybody loved that he helped produced, and there was another album that he produced. What was it? Tia? I'm so old. I'm sorry. I'm sorry, guys. I don't know these people. I'm acting like I know. Yeah, Kid Cudi. Yeah. Cudi. I don't know. See, I don't know.
You know what? Ty Dolla Sign.
So I think I'm much more interested in seeing what happens next, and like you said, the future. There's how it's going to. The fact that this is happening in this point in time now, where there's so much change going on, there's so much restructuring going on in sort of social politics and actual politics and millennials and their relationship with the church. I think this could either really influence everything and kind of really be part of the changing the tide, or nothing happens and this is the end of Kanye West's career as a performer.
Yeah. It will be interesting. Like I said, it'll be interesting to see what happens. And I Yeah, and I think you're right. Sorry, I was looking up some stuff trying to figure out what the pastor's name is who was there, and by the way, just reading through the Wikipedia article about his conversion experience really quick, it made me realize it's kind of an interesting thing because we like to there's sort of this American myth of the dramatic instant karma kind of conversion experience, but his seems to be more organic and conventional the way it really seems to work. Is that like he said he started really thinking about Jesus again after recording with Chance the Rapper.
Yeah.
And then started and then after that started having these then he had this dramatic conversion experience after like reading the Bible and stuff. But yeah, well, in talking about his success, what's also interesting is he's apparently now going back and rewriting his previous tracks to remove swearing and other objectionable things from it. Yeah.
Oh man.
So
okay.
he's
Oh.
Which I mean, you got to admit, right? It's got to be. I mean, so like if you become a born again Christian, but you still got to make a living, right? Like, and your living is to go out on concerts and perform these songs that people have loved, but like they don't reflect who you are and your values currently. I mean, but it is also kind of has a bit of a George Lucas element to it.
Yeah. Oh, geez, that never works out. I that's really weird.
Yeah. And there's also it's called like New Body or This Body or something like that. There's this track that was like people were really looking forward to because it was him with Nicki Minaj that he was recording for Yandhi, and then he decided to try to rework it as a song about baptism and like being born again. And Nicki Minaj is just like, I'm not doing that. Because there's a leaked version of it out there, and I've seen the lyrics, and yeah, it's not it's not a song about baptism.
Wow.
And as Nicki Minaj had put it on there, and it's actually quite vulgar. So that's also going to be that's going to be an interesting thing to do. It almost makes me wonder if like Kanye would be better off pulling like a Prince and like changing his name and sort of restarting his career, and under this new persona, and just sort of letting the other thing go.
Right.
But yeah, we'll see. I think a lot of people though are anticipating that like in a year or two, he's just going to come back as Yee and just like be raunchy and all that stuff again.
Do you think that maybe the reason why it's not necessarily like I kind of see it as average. I know you really like it, but do you think that maybe it's not getting those high levels because he's kind of going into territory that's sort of proven to be like, if you go into this territory, your quality will actually diminish considerably. Like maybe he's trying to figure out like how to make a Christian album actually work. You know what I mean? Like, even though I know that there are Christian bands and Christian albums that you really like and that people will really like, but it's like kind of for the most part, there's this sort of acceptance that for the most part, Christian media is not that good.
Right. It is few and far between where you encounter Christian artists that seem to be that they're trying to pave new ground musically instead of just retreading what's already popular on the radio and was popular like a year or two before. Right. That's been Christianity's MO, Christian music's MO. I mean, let's be honest, DC Talk's Jesus Freak, fairly forward thinking, right? Because there wasn't like a grunge alternative combined with rap genre floating around that they were trying to chase. They actually, I think, produced something that was of their own. But yeah, for the most part, it is sort of
kind of rough around the edges.
Yeah, and it's always it's sort of the rose art.
Yeah.
You know what I mean by that?
Do you mean
the rose art version of what's out there? Because there's a meme that's like, how I know my parents didn't love me, and it just shows the rose art logo. Because like rose art is sort of the poor alternative to like Crayola. In terms of crayons and things.
Exactly. Well,
art supplies, and so so Christian music kind of has that that rose art quality. It's like it's just as good. Right. Like it's just that's how you would like convince your friends, right? Like oh no, it's MX. I was gonna say MXPX is like just as good as Green Day, but I think MXPX is great like on their own. But like, but to be like, Petra, like they're just as good as Petra's just as good as the hair metal. Striper, they're just as good as Kiss. So I,
Jeez.
yeah, it is kind of interesting though that people are comparing Jesus is King to other songs on Kanye's, other styles from Kanye's back catalog. Is it Kanye basically doing like he actually made a very Christian album in that it sounds like other people's music?
Yeah.
It just happens to be that other person is himself.
That's pretty funny. Yeah, exactly. That's what I'm talking
And so
about.
there's a meta level to that.
It's like, yeah, that's what I'm talking. Like maybe part of this sort of it feels a little rough because it's like, how do I stay an artist but also pursue this genre that is kind of notoriously more market driven than anything?
Right.
That's more pandering. It can be very pandering. It's like a hip hop artist trying to wade into country, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So
Well, Lil Nas X, is that what you're talking about?
And that took how many years to accomplish? Come on. But I wonder what Rob Bell thinks. Let's ask him.
We should have Rob. How funny would it be if suddenly Rob Bell were just on? Like we were just like,
we can't
let's
get
call
Matt,
him.
but
And
we can get Rob Bell.
and we called him, and he just answers, and we're like, hey, since we have you, Rob, what are your thoughts on Jesus is King? So the line in Follow God that I really like,
Yeah.
and will probably show up in my Sunday sermon. It's the same one that showed up in my chapel talk on Wednesday. Is the one where it says he was talking to his dad and he tells him that it ain't like Christ, but nobody never tell you when you're being like Christ.
Right.
Which I really like that. It ain't Christ-like, but nobody never tell you when you're being like Christ, because that's true,
yeah.
right? In our culture, we're so quick to tell everybody where they're wrong,
Right.
but we don't then emphasize, hey, here's a really good thing. Like, I follow this this fairly popular Instagram account called Climb Meme Change, and it's a climate change thing that uses memes to talk about it, but it has that very like sort of like dog in a room on fire, this is fine quality to it. It's just sort of like laugh to keep from crying notion to it. But it's like, it's so quick to point out like what's so awful in the world. Like where are you then being like, hey, here's this awesome thing that's happening, in terms of climate change. Why are we only highlighting where things are awful? Because like, I don't know, Chuck Palahniuk talks about this study where they show where they've shown various groups of people different photos of like teeth, like so like they show like photos of like fine teeth, they show people with like sort of like moderate tooth issues in terms of cleanliness, and then they show people with like photos with like the worst like teeth, like just awful, like whatever. And they track like how that influenced people's oral hygiene, and they found that the first two groups, like they saw good teeth and they kind of improved their oral hygiene. The ones who saw they kind of also whatever. But the people that were shown like egregiously like awful images, they just gave up because it sort of put it in front of them that the task was too daunting and there was just sort of nothing to like. And so like I wonder about that kind of stuff in our culture. And so like the fact that Kanye pointed that out, quick to tell, nobody never tell you when you're being like Christ. Like we really should be better about that. Maybe Christians should take a page from that and be better about saying like, hey, here's where somebody is doing the work of Jesus.
Well, he hasn't been selected to be on the missions planning team, so he hasn't.
That's true.
Once that happens, he'll be hearing that a lot. That he's being Christ-like.
How many Christian universities do you think are trying to get him to come now?
How many Christian universities do you think he's applying to right now?
None, because he's a genius.
You think he'll go to Regent?
Do you think PBA is going to try to get him?
No. I highly doubt it. No. Okay. All right. Well, I think that's a good place to end, don't you?
Yes, I do. And JP, remember, you're my number one with a lemonade.
Yeah. I'll get off the gram for you. Speaking of Graham, like us on Instagram
Yes,
under
even
Masters
though
of
we
Divinity.
even though we're not supposed to like likes.
No, we don't like likes. We want them, but we don't like them. Follow us on Facebook, on Twitter. Twitter's not very active these days. Like and subscribe. Ring that bell to get notifications of new episodes. And
Listen to Jesus is King and share your thoughts.
yes, please. We were interested in your thoughts. We'd like to know what you think. It's you know what? It might seem daunting to the olds out there who listen to us, but man, it's breezy. You can get through it easily. It's
27 minutes, and a
yeah.
lot of your shows haven't even come back on yet, you know, and so you could just
Yeah.
pop it on for 27, and you know what? Like, who knows? You might discover there's a whole new genre of music that you are now into.
It's 2 Ramones albums long. That's not very long. But it's yeah, go out and listen to it. Let us know what you think. Yeah, do that. Chuck, how was your Halloween, by the way?
I live on a private school campus, and it was since Halloween was Thursday. Thursday is my res life duty night, so I didn't do much for Halloween. I sat in a study hall.
Yeah.
And I sat with people as they handed out candy because they do trick or treating here on the campus, which is kind of fun with the little kids here. So I got to see my boys in their pirate outfits do their trick or treating. But during the school day, they come to school in costumes and they do like a big parade with the little kids. And I got to see all the high school students in all their various costumes. But it's also, of course, a fraught time because, certain people's culture is not your costume. And so there's a lot of anxiety around all of that right now.
Yeah.
So yeah, but you try to see some creative stuff. I was really impressed with 2 students in the high school, one who dressed like a priest and another who dressed like the Pope. And I had them both give me blessings.
That's great.
Yeah.
Did you see the photo of Matt and his kids?
I love that he climbed up, he was Spider-Man. Miles Morales Spider-Man was Bond, and Bella was Spider-Gwen, which was just wonderful.
Adorable. It's amazing. What's really funny is I look at that photo, and the first thing that occurred to me is Bond was like, "Can I get up on the ledge too?" And there was probably 5 minutes of, "No, Bond, you can't get up the ledge with Daddy. Only Daddy can get up the ledge."
Yeah. Well, and I have to say, Matt, because of his police training and stuff, Matt has the physique that he could wear that Spider-Man costume. I would be Spider-Ham.
I would too. I would be just Alfred Molina in a Spider-Man costume. You're supposed to be Dr. Octopus, not Spider-Man, JP.
Oh.
We joke. We like jokes. Well, cool.
How was your Halloween?
Fairly uneventful. I don't
it's
know.
it's like your favorite day of the year.
I know. It's my favorite day of the year. It's my favorite season of the year. This year was hard to get into because I've just been really stressed and really kind of working on that loud, as that kids call it. I don't know why it's called loud now. I don't know.
Oh, it's not bread anymore?
It's a what?
It's not bread anymore?
I haven't heard of bread
it's
before.
Loud? You ever heard
no.
Go get that bread?
No.
You've never heard that phrase?
Never.
Oh, I think it passed you by because now it's loud.
Nah, smoking that loud. I'm not smoking that loud. No, I'm not. I don't use. Just grow it. I'm just here for.
Oh wait, okay. Oh, so loud is a phrase for the crop you grow.
I guess so. I know. I just thought it was another word for weed. I saw it on the.
That's what I'm talking about. Yeah. Bread. Okay, so bread refers to your money, going out and making money every day, bread.
No. No, it's just been a stressful month because our plants are flowering and that's a big deal. And just haven't really been able to get into it. I watched Tales from the Crypt Demon Knight last night.
Yep. I saw you post about that on the social media.
Starring Billy Zane himself, and William Sadler, who played Terrace in Die Hard 2 and the President in Iron Man 3, and also the Grim Reaper in Bill and Ted's Bogus Journey. And Jada Pinkett Smith, one of her early roles. And I watched this interesting documentary. I need to finish it about the history of haunted houses and haunted mazes and stuff, which I don't know if you knew this, Chuck. Do you know why they were sort of brought into existence in the United States?
I don't.
Quick history lesson. This is the epilogue to this whole episode. Sorry, it has nothing to do with Kanye West, but I have to share this because it's really interesting. In the 1930s, during the Depression, Halloween was a time for like really horrible pranks. Like,
Right.
I don't even call them pranks. Like it was vandalism. Like people were, and it was mostly boys sawing down like telephone poles and tipping over cars and like lighting buildings on fire. People actually using like dynamite and stuff. Like it was awful. And I think it was Illinois and their Chamber of Commerce who tried to come up with an event on Halloween to sort of get the kids off the streets into a safe place. And so they came up with the idea of like a haunted house. And it's like they tried to make it like as scary and as gory as possible to kind of scratch that itch. And that's sort of where that tradition came from. Also, like Halloween parades, dressing up in costumes, all that kind of stuff was sort of a way to deter people from the violence and try to get them more active in the community and safer. So I thought that was interesting.
Right, and you said it was like campus, basically like the precursor to Campus Crusade, right?
I don't think
did this.
I don't think it was Campus Crusade, for Christ. It was Campus Life. I don't know. Is Campus Life?
Yeah,
Associated with Campus Crusade Life?
I don't know, but you saw close enough.
But yeah, there was some because these haunted houses and these parades were put on by chambers of Chamber of Commerce. They call the JC, the Junior Chamber of Commerce. These are sort of organizations that were very community focused. Churches got involved. And so some of the early haunted houses from the 1970s were put on by like these Christian organizations like Youth for Christ and Campus Life. And, and these weren't like judgment houses or hell houses. These were the real deals, like evil clowns and slashers and zombies and stuff. So it's kind of an interesting evolution. But hell houses and judgment houses did exist back then. There were still people doing that sort of adjacent to that. But that there were Christians putting on churches putting on haunted houses back in the 70s.
Fascinating.
I know, it's great. There's this really great book that I really want to read called Trick or Treat, and it's the history of Halloween, like American Halloween tradition. And we all kind of assume it's all rooted in sort of pagan rituals and stuff, but it's like there's not exactly. You know what I mean? Like there's a more recent stuff that's been happening that sort of influence how we celebrate it today.
Yeah, Halloween has a very interesting history. I often talk about it in chapel services and stuff when All Saints Day comes around. Because by the way, as we're recording, Happy All Saints Day. Yeah. And
if you're Mexican, Happy Dia de los
Muertos.
Yes.
But no, like the canon to the ordinary, one of the members of the bishop's staff, I was on the phone with him the other day, and he's English. And he was saying, like, oh, yes, Father, this is all, I'm not going to try to do a terrible impersonation of John Tidy. Anyway, he was saying that it's, it's new to him because they don't have this in England.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
We sort of assume it's a universal thing. It is not.
It's very American.
It is. But weirdly, it's also quite popular in Japan. I understand now.
Oh, really?
That like we sort of exported, like we've exported it and Xmas. That's my term for capitalistic Christmas.
Yeah.
We've exported that over to Japan.
That's interesting. Huh.
Yeah.
Cool.
But no, if you read that book, I'd be curious to learn more.
I would too. I want to
share of your knowledge with us.
Yeah. I definitely want to learn more about sort of American Halloween and not this. I mean, I know there's like a lot of stuff that's sort of rooted in pagan ritual and stuff, but it's not so direct. A lot of it comes from just sort of like the Depression era and communities trying to like come together and trying to sort of deal with all the horrible things happening in the world,
Yeah.
So I thought that was very interesting. And
cool.
Yeah. So anyway, that's all the time we have. Thank you so much for listening. Join us again next time. Have a wonderful week. Good journey.
Good journey.
Chick-fil-A!